I have worked in war documentation for 61 years. I have read the testimonies of survivors from the Krellian Purge. I have translated the dying words of Orvathi soldiers captured at the siege of Mondus Prime. I have personally catalogued the weapons used at the Battle of Three Suns, artifacts so terrible that we keep them behind 12 layers of containment fields simply because looking at them too long makes sentient beings weep involuntarily. I thought I had seen everything. Then they handed me the Earth file. I sat down with it on a Tuesday morning. I had a cup of Teshan leaf tea, still warm. I thought I would skim it, assign it to a junior archivist, and move on to something more pressing. I finished reading it 2 days later. I had not slept. My tea had gone cold before I turned the third page. This document, this collection of testimonies, field recordings, intercepted communications, and survivor accounts, is unlike anything else in our archives. It is not a story of a great civilization falling. It is not a story of a superior force meeting an inferior one. It is something far stranger, far more unsettling, and in some ways far more important than any military record we have ever produced. It is the story of what happened when the Velthari Empire, the most powerful military force in 7 sectors, decided to conquer a small blue planet called Earth. And what the humans did about it. I will not spoil what you are about to read. I will only say this. We have removed the classification. We are releasing this archive to every inhabited world in the galactic collective, not because we want to celebrate war, not because we want to glorify violence or the humans who perpetuated it. We are releasing it because every civilization in the galaxy needs to understand what happened here. Because the Velthari thought they were hunting prey. And they found something that had been hunting itself for 10,000 years, something that was very, very good at it, and something that was deeply, profoundly unwilling to stop. Read carefully. Remember what you read. And if you are a civilization that is currently considering aggressive expansion toward the Sol system, don't. Thesson Muvori, Senior Curator. Galactic Remembrance Collective, Orin Station. Dated 2401 CE. Part 1, Before the Storm. Chapter 1, The VLTHARI Empire, What They Were. To understand what happened at Earth, you first need to understand what the Velthari were. And I use the past tense deliberately. The Velthari Empire, at the height of its power in 2385 CE, controlled 43 star systems. They had a military force of approximately 12 billion active soldiers. Their fleet consisted of roughly 800,000 warships, ranging from single-pilot interceptors to planet-killer capital ships the size of small moons. Their weapons technology was rated Class 7 on the galactic warfare scale, placing them in the top 3% of known military powers in the explored galaxy. They had never lost a war. Not once. In 400 years of recorded expansion, the Velthari had engaged 63 separate civilizations. 51 of those civilizations had surrendered within the first week of engagement. 9 had been completely absorbed into the Empire after brief, decisive campaigns. 2 had attempted sustained resistance and had ultimately been broken, 1 after 6 months, 1 after 2 years. No one had ever pushed the Velthari back. No one had ever made them retreat. No one had ever made them afraid. This is documented fact. It is not propaganda. The Velthari archives, which we obtained during the post-war treaty process, confirm every word of it. They were genuinely, historically, verifiably unstoppable. Right up until the moment they weren't. I want to include here a pre-war assessment document recovered from the Velthari command archives. It was written by a military analyst named Sothrin Hell, and it was the document that convinced the Velthari High Command to authorize the Earth campaign. I include it not to embarrass the Velthari or to mock the dead, but because it is necessary context. It tells you exactly what the Velthari thought they were walking into. Recovered document, VLTHARI Imperial Command. Pre-engagement assessment, designation Sol 3, Human Inhabited World. Analyst, Sothrin Hell, Intelligence Division, 1st Fleet. Dated 2385 CE. Assessment summary. Sol 3, locally designated Earth, presents an acquisition opportunity of medium-high value and extremely low military risk. The planet's primary species, self-designated humans, are a Class 3 biological entity with no detectable psionic capability, limited genetic adaptability, and a lifespan of approximately 70-90 standard cycles. They are carbon-based, oxygen-dependent, and physically unremarkable by galactic standards. Their musculature is moderate, their sensory range is limited, and they lack any natural weapons of note. Technologically, they have achieved basic interstellar capacity within the last 3 decades, with a small number of colony ships and mining operations extending to nearby star systems. Their weapons technology is rated Class 3, significant by local standards, negligible by ours. Politically, the species is fractured. Earth maintains 17 separate major governing bodies, dozens of smaller nations, and a loosely federated planetary council that has been in active political dispute for the last 8 years. Internal cultural divisions are profound and long-standing. Military assessment. The humans have a combined active military force of approximately 600 million soldiers across all factions. They have shown a historical tendency toward internal conflict. Their own records document thousands of wars fought against each other over the last 10 millennia. This internal aggression is a liability, not an asset. A species that spends most of its energy fighting itself cannot mount a coherent external defense. Recommendation: authorize engagement. Projected timeline to planetary submission: 3-6 weeks. Casualties expected: negligible. Sothrin Hell. I want to note for the record that Sothrin Hell survived the war. He was one of the first Velthari to surrender, and he spent the following decade writing a remarkably honest account of his miscalculations. He was not a stupid man. He was not a careless analyst. He was, by all accounts, excellent at his job. He simply had never encountered humans before. He had no framework for what he was looking at. He saw the divisions. He saw the internal conflicts. He saw the political fractures and the cultural disagreements and the thousands of years of wars fought against each other. He missed the part that mattered. He missed what all of those thousands of years of fighting each other had produced. Chapter 2, The First Contact, What the Humans Saw. Witness Account 1. Name: Dr. Yale Aachen. Occupation: astrophysicist, Tel Aviv University, Earth. Date of interview: 2389 CE. Location: Galactic Remembrance Archive Office, Jerusalem, Earth. Recording begins. I was in my office. It was a Thursday afternoon. I remember that specifically because I had a department meeting in 20 minutes that I was absolutely dreading, and then my monitoring system started screaming alerts at me, and I forgot entirely about the meeting, and I never went. The alerts were from the Deep Space Array. We had these distributed sensor networks out past the Uit cloud. Nothing fancy by galactic standards. I know that now, but they were ours, and we were proud of them. And they were picking up mass transit signatures unlike anything natural. I ran the numbers 3 times, because the first 2 times I got results that seemed physically impossible. 240,000 ships. 240,000. Organized, structured, moving in formation at a speed that suggested drives we had never seen, coming directly toward us. I called my department head. He told me to call the Planetary Defense Office. I called the Planetary Defense Office, and the woman who answered sounded bored until I told her the numbers, and then she went very quiet for a very long time, and then she said, "Hold on." And I held on for 11 minutes, and when she came back, her voice was completely different. She said, "We see it." And then she said something I will never forget for the rest of my life. She said, "Don't panic, we're getting the generals." And the way she said it, she sounded almost excited, not frightened, not desperate, excited, like something she'd been waiting for was finally happening. I remember thinking that was strange. I remember thinking, we are looking at 240,000 warships coming toward our planet, and this woman sounds excited. But later, much later, I understood it. Because she had grown up in a military family. She had served in the Eurasian theater when she was 22. She had spent her whole adult life in planetary defense, watching and waiting and training, and preparing for something that never came, and now it was coming, and some part of her, some very deep, very old part of her, wasn't afraid. It was ready. That's what I missed. That's what the Velthari missed. That's what everyone who has never lived through a human war missed. Humans have been at war their entire history. Not occasionally, constantly. Their entire recorded civilization has been shaped by conflict. Their technology, their medicine, their political systems, their social structures, all of it has been pressed through the crucible of war over and over again for 10,000 years. They weren't a civilian species that had built a military. They were a warrior species that had, very recently, learned to do some other things too. Recording ends. Witness account 2. Name, General Amara Nwasubulenk. Occupation, Supreme Commander, Unified Earth Defense Force. Date of interview, 2390 CE. Location, UEDF Headquarters, Lagos Orbital Station. Recording begins. When they told me about the fleet, I was in the middle of breakfast. Scrambled eggs. Good ones, too. I didn't get to finish them. I looked at the data. I looked at it for a long time. My aide was standing there waiting for me to react, and I just kept looking at the data. 240,000 ships, unknown technology, unknown weapon systems, heading toward us at a velocity that suggested they'd arrive in approximately 72 hours. My aide, young captain, very smart, first deployment, he said, "General, what are your orders?" I said, "Get me the fleet commanders, all of them, and someone get me more eggs because this is going to be a long day." He kind of stared at me. I said, "Son, we've been preparing for this for 30 years. We built the planetary shield grid in 2358. We've been running war games against hypothetical superior opponents since 2361. Every single defense installation on this planet and in this system has been updated in the last decade with exactly this scenario in mind. The Velthari, or whoever they are, have 240,000 ships." I paused. I said, "We have Earth." He still looked confused. He was a young man. He hadn't quite grasped yet what that meant. I said, "Do you understand what this planet is? Do you understand what is living on this rock? We have 8 billion of the most stubborn, creative, violent, adaptive, unpredictable organisms in the known galaxy. We have every resource a species needs to make war. We have supply chains that survived 3 world wars and kept running. We have engineers who can redesign weapons systems in the field under fire. We have soldiers who have been fighting in some form or another since before they had iron." I leaned back. I said, "Let them come." And I meant it. Not because I wasn't afraid, I was afraid. I want that on the record, I was terrified, but because I understood something that the Velthari clearly did not. There is no harder target in the galaxy than a planet full of humans who have decided they are not going to lose. Recording ends. Part 2, The Arrival. Chapter 3, Fleet Commander DRUHALVOSS. His own words. Recovered recording. Velthari Command Ship Eternal Dominion. Speaker, Fleet Commander Druhal Voss. Recorded 2387 CE, 18 hours before Earth engagement. Source, Post-War Archive Surrender. Translated from Velthari High Command dialect. Recording begins. This is a personal log. I do not usually keep personal logs, but something about this campaign feels different and I want to record my thoughts while they are still unfiltered. We are 18 hours from Earth orbit. The target world is visible on the main display, a blue sphere, very pretty, covered in cloud and ocean. It looks peaceful from this distance. Everything looks peaceful from this distance. My intelligence files tell me that this world has been at war with itself more or less continuously for the last 6,000 years. I find this detail amusing rather than concerning. A species that fights itself is a species divided, and divided species do not present coherent military problems. They present political problems, administrative problems, assimilation, logistics, but not military problems. My second officer, Subcommander Rathan, asked me this morning if I thought the humans would fight. I told him, every species fights. That is not the interesting question. The interesting question is how long they fight before they break. Based on our intelligence assessment, I projected 2 weeks, perhaps 3 if some faction proves particularly stubborn. I have conquered 23 worlds personally. I have never taken longer than 6 weeks. I am not concerned. I am, if I am honest, a little bored. I went to look at the target display again just now at that small blue planet. I stared at it for a while. Something about it bothers me, in a way I cannot fully articulate. I have conquered worlds that were beautiful before. I have conquered worlds whose inhabitants pleaded and wept. I have conquered worlds whose defenders died rather than surrender, which I respect even if I do not understand it. But something about this one is nagging at me. I keep coming back to one line in the intelligence assessment, one line that I initially read past without much thought. The analyst wrote, "Their historical records document thousands of wars fought against each other over the last 10 millennia. Thousands of wars. In 10,000 years. I keep thinking about that number. Every other species we have engaged was a species that had been at peace, mostly, before we arrived. The Krellians had not had a major war in 3 centuries. The Orvathi had been in a stable political federation for 150 years. The Mundari had largely disarmed after signing their global peace accords 4 decades before we reached them. The humans have been at war with each other for the last 10,000 years. What does that produce? What kind of species does that forge? I am probably overthinking this. It is probably nothing. Recording ends, gap in recording, recording resumes. This is a second log, approximately 4 hours after the first. I could not sleep. I got up and went to look at the human military communications we have been intercepting. Our language division has been working on translation and has provided me with rough interpretations. I read them for 2 hours. I am now substantially less certain about the 2-week estimate. The humans are not panicking. That is the first thing I noticed. I have intercepted the communications of 63 civilizations facing our fleet, and they all panic. It is understandable. We are terrifying by any reasonable standard, but the humans are not panicking. They are organizing. The communications I am reading are about logistics, supply chains, munitions inventory, weapons systems cross-referencing. They are having arguments, very heated ones, apparently, based on the translation notes, about optimal defense formation strategies. They are debating tactical approaches with an energy and specificity that I associate with professional military minds, not civilian populations. I read one intercepted exchange between 2 of their field commanders, one named Vasquez, one named Chen, and they were arguing about whether to engage our fleet in open space or draw us into the atmosphere. Vasquez wanted to meet us at the perimeter. Chen wanted to let us commit to approach, and then hit us in the thermosphere where our maneuvering capability would be compromised by gravitational variance. These are not the arguments of a species in shock. These are the arguments of professionals who have been thinking about scenarios exactly like this one for a very long time. Chen was right, by the way, about the thermosphere. I only realized that later. I am going to sleep now. I am also going to triple-check our weapons readiness reports in the morning. Recording ends. Chapter 4, the first hour. Witness account 3. Name, Colonel Priya Sharma Konkwa. Occupation, Commander Thermosphere Defense Wing, UEDF. Date of interview, 2388 CA. Location, somewhere over the Arabian Sea aboard a transport, exact position classified. Recording begins. I had been in my fighter for 40 minutes before they arrived. We were holding position at the upper thermosphere, about 85 kilometers up. You can see the curve of the planet from there. The black of space above you, the pale blue glow of the atmosphere below. It's beautiful. It was beautiful. I remember thinking that because I remember thinking it might be the last beautiful thing I ever saw. I had 42 fighters in my wing. Behind me, spread across the thermosphere in a line that stretched over 2,000 kilometers, were approximately 900 more wings. 40,000 fighters total, roughly, plus the support craft and the orbital platforms and the ground-based rail cannons and the suborbital missile batteries. Our strategy, if I can summarize it for the record, was simple. We were not going to stop them from entering the atmosphere. We didn't have the firepower to stop 240,000 ships in open space. We were realistic about our numbers, but we could funnel them. We could force them to come in through corridors where our weapons could be concentrated. We could make every approach vector a gauntlet. And we had something else. We had something they didn't know about. For the last 12 years, the Defense Engineering Corps had been retrofitting the entire orbital defense grid with what they called the mesh. It was a layered electromagnetic and kinetic weapons network covering every approach angle to Earth. Not a wall you can smash through. The mesh was more like a spider web. Let things in. then make getting back out very, very difficult. I knew about the mesh, I had read the specs. I had participated in 3 simulation runs against it. I still didn't fully believe in it until I saw it work. The Velthari came in at 900 hours, Earth Central Time. I will remember that moment for the rest of my life. 240,000 ships, and they were enormous. I mean, they were genuinely enormous in a way that photographs don't prepare you for. The big ones, the capital ships, were the size of cities. They blotted out sections of the sky. They came out of whatever their drive system was in flashes of light that looked like new stars being born, dozens at a time, hundreds at a time. And I swear I heard, though the comms team says my mic was off at the time, I heard someone in a nearby fighter just say, very quietly, "Oh." Just that, "Oh." Because what else do you say? Then my radio came back on, and General Nwasubalenko's voice came through, and she said, very calm, very clear, "All wings, weapons hot, you know what to do." And we did. God help us, we did. Recording ends. Witness account for. Name, Subcommander Rathandov. Occupation, Second Officer, Velthari Command Ship Eternal Dominion. Date of interview, 2388 CA. Location, Prisoner Processing Facility, Earth. Note, first Velthari officer to formally request refugee status from the Galactic Collective. Request granted. Recording begins. I need you to understand something before I begin. I have served in the Velthari Imperial Navy for 32 years. I have participated in 14 planetary conquests. I am not a naive person. I am not easily surprised. I have seen things in my career that would make most sentient beings require psychological treatment. What the humans did in the first hour of engagement, I would not have believed if I had not seen it personally. We came in at standard formation approach, a technique that had never failed us in 40 campaigns. We came in at multiple vectors simultaneously, a classic saturation approach designed to overwhelm the defenders' targeting systems. We were confident. Fleet Commander Voss gave the order to begin approach at what humans call 900 hours, and we moved in. The humans did not panic. That was the first wrong sign. Every previous species we had engaged, at the moment of our approach, their communications went chaotic. Fear does that to organized systems. Fear is the great disorganizer. We had built our military doctrine partly around the psychology of fear. The size of our fleet, the configuration of our approach, all of it was designed to be terrifying, to produce that chaotic panic before we had even fired a shot. The humans' communications, which our decryption division was monitoring in real time, became more organized, not less. The command structure tightened. The orders got shorter, clearer, more precise. The chatter dropped out. Only essentials moved through the channels. That was the first sign. Then their weapons opened up. I was standing at my station on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. I was watching the tactical display. And I watched 40,000 of their fighters, which were small by our standards, individually negligible, form into coordinated attack patterns unlike anything I had seen. Not a wave, not a wall, something more like a school of fish, organic, adaptive, every individual unit making micro-adjustments in real time, the whole formation flowing around our weapons fire like water around stones. They had spent 30 years figuring out exactly how to fight us. 30 years of simulations, of studying galactic warfare doctrine, of reverse engineering alien weapons captured from other species. They had modeled our tactics with a thoroughness that we would have found admirable if we'd known about it. We fired our initial salvo. Standard opening engagement, high-energy plasma bolts, widespread, designed to break formation and create confusion. The humans' formation did not break. It bent, flowed. The fighters that would have been hit simply weren't there anymore. They had moved, fractionally, collectively, and our plasma bolts passed through empty space where targets had been half a second before. I remember looking at Fleet Commander Voss at that moment. He was frowning. That was unusual. I had served with Druhal Voss for 19 years. I had never seen him frown during an engagement. "Tighten the spread," he said. "Recalibrate targeting, anticipated maneuver correction +4. We recalibrated, we fired again. The humans had already anticipated the recalibration and adjusted their formation accordingly. I heard our weapons officer say very quietly, "They predicted our targeting adjustment." and Fleet Commander Voss said nothing. He just stood there, frowning. Recording ends. Part 3, The War. Chapter 5, The Ground Below. Witness Account 5. Name, Sergeant Major Kweku Antwidankwa. Occupation, Infantry, 14th Unified Earth Ground Force, Accra Deployment. Date of interview, 2389 CE. Location, Veterans Medical Center, Accra, Earth. Recording begins. They didn't know what to do with us on the ground. That was the thing nobody talks about, but I'll say it. The Velthari had the most powerful fleet any of us had ever seen, but their ground doctrine was built for civilizations that fell apart when the ships arrived. They expected to land troops on a population that was already broken, already surrendering. They expected logistical occupation, not combat. They got combat. My unit was stationed on the western outskirts of Accra. We'd been reinforcing our positions for 3 days before the first Velthari ground forces landed. And when I say reinforcing, I don't mean digging foxholes. I mean that the Defense Engineering Corps had been down there with us, building tunnel systems, laying sensor networks, installing automated defense platforms, integrating our positions into the planetary mesh that the orbital team was managing from above. We were not just soldiers, we were nodes in a system. The Velthari landed their first ground contingent about 40 kilometers north of our position. It was a large force. I saw the orbital imagery. They put down something like 200,000 troops in the first landing. That sounds enormous. It was enormous. These were professional soldiers in armor that made our best gear look like something you'd find at a museum. Their weapons were things I'd never seen before, directed energy systems, field generators, the works. They advanced south toward the city. They had gone maybe 12 kilometers before the ground opened up beneath them. I want to be accurate here because this matters for the record. The tunnel systems our engineers had built weren't just for shelter. They were for movement. We could put soldiers anywhere in a 40-kilometer radius without ever surfacing. The automated defense platforms were positioned at intervals and camouflaged so thoroughly that our own people sometimes walked past them without seeing them. When the Velthari force had committed fully to their advance, when they were stretched out along a 12-kilometer column in terrain they didn't know, operating on maps they'd compiled from orbital observation, because they hadn't scouted the ground properly, because they hadn't expected to need to, we activated the platforms. And then we surfaced. From everywhere. From nowhere. I came up out of a tunnel hatch 50 meters from the edge of their formation. There were 8 of us in my unit. We hit the rear of their column, pulled back into the tunnels before they could effectively return fire, surfaced 200 meters away, hit them again, pulled back again. We did this for 6 hours. I want to be clear, we were not winning a stand-up fight. Their armor and their weapons were substantially superior to ours in direct engagement. If they had been able to pin us in open ground, we would have been in serious trouble. But they couldn't pin us. They couldn't predict where we'd appear. They couldn't trace our tunnel network because we'd built it to resist their sensor systems. And every time they stopped to regroup and assess, we hit them from a new direction. By the time nightfall came on that first day, the Velthari column, 200,000 soldiers, had advanced less than 2 kilometers further south. They had taken casualties that I'm not cleared to disclose the exact number of, but that I will say were significant. And they were, as I heard from the intelligence feeds later, very, very confused. One thing I remember specifically from that day, one thing that has stayed with me. Late in the afternoon, we had a brief hold, both sides pulling back, regrouping. I surfaced at an observation point on a small ridge and I could see a section of the Velthari force about 300 meters away. Just standing there. Not advancing, not retreating, just standing there. And even from that distance, even in their armor that hid everything about their physiology, I could tell something was wrong with their posture. Something uncertain. Something that in humans I would have called hesitation. I radioed my co. I said, I think they're scared. She said, good. Keep them that way. Recording ends. Chapter 6, The Navy's Nightmare. Witness Account 6. Name, Rear Admiral Fatu Mbe Erickson. Occupation, Commander Atlantic Fleet, UEDF Naval Command. Date of interview, 2389 CE. Location, UEDF Naval HQ, Dakar Atlantis Station. Recording begins. The thing about fighting in space is that it's three-dimensional. Most military doctrine in history, human military doctrine, was fundamentally two-dimensional. You had land and you had sea, and you operated in one plane at a time. Space changed that. What most people don't realize is that humans had been running three-dimensional combat simulations for decades before the Velthari arrived. We had wargamed it obsessively. We had entire military academies dedicated to thinking about how space combat worked, what the physics meant, what the geometry meant, what the psychology meant. The Velthari had been fighting in space for 400 years, but they had established doctrine. Successful, proven, reliable doctrine. They fought the same way every time because the same way had always worked. We had no successful doctrine because we'd never actually done it. We had only theories. But theories, it turns out, can be better than doctrine, because theories aren't habits, theories are flexible. My naval command covered the orbital engagement zone above the Atlantic and extending out to L2. In the first 3 days, my fleet engaged Velthari forces in 6 major actions. I am not going to walk through all of them in detail. There are operational reports for that. But I want to describe one specific engagement because I think it illustrates something important. On the 3rd day, we detected a Velthari capital ship, one of their big ones, city-sized, maneuvering toward a gap in our orbital defense grid near what we were calling Position 7. It was a legitimate gap. They had correctly identified a weakness in our coverage. I watched them maneuver toward it and I thought, good. Because that gap was not a flaw, it was a mouth. We had deliberately created it. We had been maintaining it for 2 days, very carefully, making sure it was visible to their sensors, making sure it looked genuine. And we had been very quietly, over those 2 days, moving assets into position around it. The capital ship was enormous. It was, genuinely, one of the most impressive things I have ever seen in my career. Even on the tactical display, even knowing what we were planning, I felt something when I saw it move. Awe, I think, simple human awe at the scale of it. It moved into the gap. And I said very calmly into my command channel, close the net. 140 ships that had been running dark, 0 emissions, 0 signals, as close to invisible as we knew how to be, activated simultaneously. They came in from above and below and all sides of that gap, every angle, every vector, at the same moment. The capital ship could not maneuver out of them all. The battle that followed lasted about 20 minutes. A capital ship that size has substantial point defense capability. We took losses, real losses, significant losses, and I carry every one of those names. But at the end of 20 minutes, the most powerful single vessel in the Velthari attack fleet was adrift and critically damaged. I want to be honest about something here, because I think honesty matters in this record. When it was over, when that ship was silent on my display, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sick. Not guilty, I'd do it again without hesitation. We were defending our home, but sick in the way that combat success always makes me feel sick. Because those were people on that ship. Different biology, very different culture, clearly aggressive imperial intent. But people, war is not triumphant, not even when you're winning. Anyone who tells you otherwise hasn't done it. I reported to General Nwasubalenko. I said the engagement was successful. She said good. She said, keep going. So I kept going. Recording ends. Chapter 7. The VELTHARI begin to understand. Recovered recording. Velthari Command Ship Eternal Dominion. Speaker, Fleet Commander Druhal Vas. Recorded, Day 5 of Engagement, 2387 CE. Translated from Velthari High Command dialect. Recording begins. Personal log, Day 5. I am going to be honest in this log in a way that I cannot be in my official reports. I am going to be honest because I think the record requires it, and because I am beginning to suspect that this record may eventually be seen by eyes other than mine. We are losing. I do not mean we are defeated. I do not mean the war is over. We still have the vast majority of our fleet operational. We still have substantial military capacity. We are not broken. But we are losing. In 5 days of engagement, we have achieved none of our primary objectives. We have not established orbital dominance. We have not secured any landing zones. We have not breached the planetary shield grid, which continues to operate in ways that our engineers say they do not fully understand. And our ground forces, the forces that landed on the first day, 200,000 of my best soldiers, are bogged down in terrain they cannot master against an enemy that appears to have spent 30 years specifically preparing to fight us. We had not anticipated 30 years of preparation. We had not anticipated that. I have been reading the intelligence files again, the original assessment, the line about thousands of wars over 10 millennia. I understand now what I missed, what Sothran Hell missed, though I will not put this in my official report because it would be unfair to him. He gave me accurate data. I drew the wrong conclusions from it. A species that has been at war with itself for 10,000 years does not have a military. It is a military. The distinction matters more than I can express in words. Their soldiers fight with a fluidity and adaptability that I have never encountered. They do not follow fixed protocols. They improvise, they adapt in real time. Their tactics evolve hour by hour in response to what we do. We adjust our doctrine to counter them, and they have already adjusted to our adjustment before we have finished making it. And they do not break. That is the thing I cannot account for. Every other species, everyone, at some point breaks. Reaches a threshold where the losses become too great, where the psychological weight becomes too much, where the logical calculus of survival overrides the emotional drive to resist. The humans have not broken. On the third day, we destroyed one of their major orbital platforms. It was a significant blow. I watched their communications expecting the panic, the demoralization. Instead, what I saw was the orbital platform crew evacuating an emergency craft. And then, before the debris had even fully dispersed, I saw another unit moving to reactivate backup systems on a secondary platform nearby. They had backup systems for their backup systems. They had planned for losing the platforms. They had planned for losing multiple platforms. I am beginning to understand that they planned for losing almost everything and still fighting. I am going to contact High Command today and request substantial reinforcements. I am going to word the request carefully because I cannot tell them the truth, which is that I am afraid. I am afraid. I have never been afraid in combat, not once in 32 years. I am afraid now. Recording ends. Part 4, The Turning. Chapter 8, Week 2. Witness Account 7. Name, Dr. Mina Sorensen Park. Occupation, Field Medic, UEDF 3rd Mobile Medical Corps. Date of interview, 2389 CE. Location, Memorial Medical Center, Oslo, Earth. Recording begins. I need to explain something about what field medicine looks like in that kind of conflict. We worked in 24-hour rotations. When your rotation was done, you slept. Didn't matter where, didn't matter what was happening. You slept, or you stopped being functional and then you were a liability. We were strict about it in a way that seemed almost callous sometimes. People would want to keep going. I would tell them very gently and then not gently at all. You sleep now or you make a mistake tomorrow that kills someone. Go. Sleep. The injuries we were seeing were unlike anything in our medical training. We had been given what briefings we could on Velthari weapons technology before the engagement. Our medical corps had actually been working on this for years, building theoretical protocols for alien energy weapon injuries. But there is a difference between theory and a person in front of you with a wound type you have never seen before. We adapted. That sounds simple when I say it like that. We adapted. But I want to be precise. We developed effective field treatment protocols for weapons we had no prior experience with in approximately 2 weeks, working under fire, with limited supplies, with an enemy that was, at that point, still advancing in some sectors. I am not saying this to boast. I am saying it because it mattered. One of the reasons human casualties, while significant, remained lower than the Velthari projections predicted was that our medical corps kept people alive who should not, by the numbers, have survived. There was a soldier in my unit, I'll call him Sergeant A, he's asked not to be named, who came in during the second week with an injury from a Velthari directed energy weapon that had no equivalent in any human medical literature. I stood over him and I had 2 minutes to make a decision about treatment, and I thought, I don't know what this is. I have never seen this. I have no protocol. And then I thought, okay, what do I know? What is actually happening here to this tissue? What is the mechanism? What do I have available? I improvised. It was a bad fix. It worked. He kept his arm. He's back on active duty. He sent me a cake last year on the anniversary. That's what I mean by adapting. That's what humans do. We do not have the right tool, so we make a tool from what we have. We always have. Recording ends. Chapter 9, the moment it changed. Witness account 8. Name, Fleet Captain Tomas Yevgrafov Nakamura. Occupation, Commander UEDF Fast Attack Squadron 7. Date of interview, 2388 CA. Location, en route to unnamed destination, classified. Recording begins. There was a specific moment when I knew we had won. Not the moment the war was over, that was weeks later. Not the moment we stopped them, there was no single, clear moment for that either. It was a gradual thing, the stopping. But there was a specific moment when I knew, in my gut, the way you know things in your gut when you've been in combat long enough. It was the 14th day. My squadron had been running continuous operations for 8 days, with minimal rest. We were in the orbital zone above what used to be the Pacific sector, and we had been playing cat and mouse with a Velthari fast attack wing that was trying to open a corridor for a fresh capital ship movement. 14 days in, the Velthari fast attack wing broke formation. It sounds like nothing when I say it like that, but let me explain what it meant. The Velthari did not break formation, not in 14 days, not once. Their discipline was extraordinary. Whatever I thought of their strategic decisions, their individual soldiers and pilots were professionals. They held formation under conditions that would have broken lesser units. We had been trying to break their formations for 2 weeks, and we had not managed it. On day 14, they broke formation. Not because of a single overwhelming blow, not because we had suddenly found some magic weapon, but because after 14 days of constant adaptation, constant pressure, constant unpredictability, after 14 days of fighting humans who fought differently every time, who never gave you the same problem twice, who seemed to find a new angle of attack every single time you thought you'd seen all their angles, the discipline cracked. I watched it on my tactical display. Their formation held, and then 3 pilots at the edge of the wing deviated, small deviations. You would barely notice if you weren't watching closely, but I was watching closely. I keyed my radio. I said to my second, "They're starting to make mistakes, they're rattled." She said, "How can you tell?" I said, "Because they're doing what we do after 2 weeks of fighting something you can't figure out." She said, "What's that?" I said, "Flinching." The Velthari had started flinching. The greatest military force in 7 sectors had started flinching at shadows. After that, everything was just work. Recording ends. Part 5, the end. Chapter 10, what the VELTHARI saw at the finish. Witness account 9. Name, Fleet Commander Druhal Vas. Occupation, Commander Velthari 1st Fleet Earth Campaign. Date of interview, 2387 CE, immediately post-surrender. Location, Earth POW Facility 7, undisclosed location. Note, this interview was conducted within 48 hours of Vas's formal surrender. Recording begins. I am not going to insult the humans conducting this interview by pretending I am fully composed. I am not composed. I want to be honest in this record. I have decided to be honest. I do not think honesty can make my situation worse at this point. We came to Earth expecting a 3-week campaign. We were there for 41 days before I issued the surrender order. In 41 days, we had achieved none of our strategic objectives. None. We had not subdued the human military. We had not broken the planetary shield grid. We had not established a single stable ground position. We had not disrupted their command structure, which remained functional throughout despite our sustained attempts to target it. In 41 days, we had lost, and I want these numbers in the record because they need to be understood. We had lost 41,000 ships, out of 240,000. 17% of our fleet in 41 days against a species that had never fought a galactic war before. We had lost an estimated 9 million soldiers in ground engagement. And the humans were still going. That is the thing I cannot convey adequately in words. The humans were still going. They were not broken. They were not at the end of their resources. They were tired. The intelligence intercepts made that clear. Their people were exhausted, but exhausted humans, it turns out, are still extremely dangerous. One of my intelligence officers said to me, on the 39th day, that the human military appeared to have plans for everything. He said he had been analyzing their strategic documents, and he could not find a scenario they had not prepared for. He said it seemed like they had spent 30 years imagining every possible way they could lose, and then building a response to each one. I said, yes, that is exactly what they had done. He said, who prepares for everything? I said, a species that learned to fight by fighting for 10,000 years. A species that has lost enough wars to understand what losing looks like. A species that has never had the luxury of assuming it would win. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, we should go home. I said, I think so too. I issued the withdrawal order the next morning. And then, because our losses had been severe enough that I was genuinely uncertain about our ability to safely navigate all remaining ships through the withdrawal, I did something that I know will be in my historical record forever. I asked the humans for help. I contacted General Nwasubalenko directly. I told her we were withdrawing. I told her we had damaged ships that needed safe corridors to avoid collision during the pullback. I asked her formally to provide those corridors. She said yes. Immediately, without conditions, without negotiation. She said, I'll have the corridors marked within the hour. Get your people home. That right there is what I could not have predicted about humans. That is the thing that I think about most. She had been fighting us for 41 days. We had done real damage to her world, to her people. And when I asked for help, she said yes without a moment's hesitation. I do not fully understand it. I think about it all the time. Recording ends. Chapter 11, Aftermath, The Counting. Witness Account 10. Name, General Amara Nwasubalenko. Occupation, Supreme Commander, Unified Earth Defense Force. Date of interview, 2390 CE. Location, UEDF Headquarters, Lagos Orbital Station. Note, this is Nwasubalenko's second interview. Her first is documented as Witness Account 2. Recording begins. When Voss called me, I will be honest, I almost didn't answer. I was running on about 4 hours of sleep in the last 3 days. I was in the middle of a logistics review for the northern sector. My aide handed me the channel request and said it was the Velthari fleet commander, and I just sat there for a second and stared at the panel. Then I picked up. He asked for the corridors. I said yes. My aide, after the call ended, looked at me like I had done something strange. He said, you just agreed immediately. I said yes. He said we could have used that as leverage, negotiated terms. I said, for what? We won. We don't need to extract the last drop out of it. Get their ships home safely and they stop being a threat in our theater and we can start the actual work. The actual work. People forget because the fighting is the dramatic part. The fighting is what gets remembered. People forget that after the fighting is the actual work. The accounting. We lost 93,000 military personnel in those 41 days. 93,000. That number lives in me. Every single one of those names lives in me. There were also civilian casualties from the ground engagements. Significant, but substantially lower than projected, because our evacuation protocols and civilian shelter systems worked. But I am not cleared to release the full civilian numbers here. Infrastructure damage was extensive in some sectors. Repairable, we built things to be repairable, but extensive. And then there was the psychological cost, which is harder to quantify but is real. My soldiers were not the same people after 41 days of that. Some of them were better in ways that sound wrong to say but are true. Calmer, more certain of themselves, more certain of each other, but some of them were damaged in ways that took years to address. Combat does that. It always does that. I have been asked many times in the years since what I think about the war, what I think about the Velthari, whether I'm angry at them. The honest answer is complicated. Am I angry? Yes. Yes, I am angry that they came here. I am angry that they thought they could just show up with their fleet and take what they wanted. I am angry about every name on the memorial wall. But I also, and I know this sounds strange, I also understand it. They did what empires do. They expanded. They assumed the next world would be like the last one. They made a mistake based on incomplete information. That is a very human mistake, actually. Maybe that's why I can understand it. The thing I told my staff, after it was over, after the corridors were clear and the last Velthari ship had jumped away. I told them we had not won because we were stronger. We were not stronger, not physically, not technologically, not in raw numbers. We won because we were ready, because we had never had the luxury of not being ready, because somewhere in the long and ugly and bloody story of humanity, somewhere in all those thousands of wars we'd fought against each other, we had learned things about survival and adaptation and refusing to stop that you can't learn any other way. We won because we were human. In every complicated, exhausting, blood-stained, stubborn, brilliant, terrible sense of that word. We were human, and no one, not then, not ever, had figured out how to beat that. Recording ends.